Dr. Amit Sen is a child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Delhi. After finishing medicine from AFMC Pune, he went to do his MD in psychiatry from Nimans, Bangalore. Post a longish stint in Newcastle, UK, he added two more qualifications, one of them being in child and adolescent psychiatry. Dr. Sen has been practicing child psychiatry for nearly 20 years now. He's the founder director of Children First, a multidisciplinary institute that provides clinical and community-based services, training, and research in child and adolescent mental health. He's the founder of the ever-evolving mental health program in Salam Baling Trust, an organization looking after thousands of street children in Delhi. He's also presented in various international and national conferences, written and spoken in popular media, and written chapters in books and published scientific papers in peer-reviewed journal. His topic for today is paving the path to healing, resolving therapeutic challenges while helping with trauma recovery in children. Dr. Sen, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, the Foundation, for having me here today. I didn't quite know what I was going to expect here, but this morning session has been so stimulating and so enriching. I'm so glad that I'm being a part of all this. So my talk is about, well, before I go to the topic, it's really from the clinical as well as the experiences I've had over the years in developing services. And most of this actually pertains to clinical work and management of children who have already been or have gone through some kind of abuse, child sexual abuse. The topic of the presentation, as you can see, is very impressive. And it came about when Janvi was actually sending me options of what the topic could be. And we had a few toing and froing. And finally, she sent me this, and I thought, wow, fantastic. It's, looks so impressive indeed. And I said yes to it quickly. And then I realized how elaborate this is going to be. I mean, where am I going to start, So I thought of starting here. So human development, if you look at it, the first definition I think I've taken it from Wikipedia. It's a process of individual adaptation to a complex and ever-changing environment. But since I work with children, I'm more interested in how children work and how they grow. It's something that I've again cobbled up, as my presentation is, you will realize. It's a distinctive and dynamic neurodevelopmental maze of a child interacting with an equally complex and fluid environment. Now, how complex can that be? Yeah? And yet, so exciting, because it's full of possibilities. So even when children go through bad times, there are possibilities that we may be able to do something about it. And that's, I think, the most exciting part of the ever-growing knowledge about the plasticity of the brain and what have you, right? So if you can quickly go through, so I'm going to take you through some very basic stuff. And I hope that will actually tie into what I'm going to discuss in terms of therapy, yeah? A long shot, but let's see how it works. So areas of child development, if you look at it, read about it in books, are no doubt medical, and then it's psychological and so on and so forth. And you have topics like motor development, language, social, cognitive, yeah, and educational, no doubt. And finally, emotional. Now, emotional development does not find its way, even today, as a separate topic, right? It does not. And that's the most surprising part. And maybe because it's so complex. I mean, historically, you see reference to emotional development in various psychodynamic theories by Freud, by Erikson. And if you look at it carefully, although it doesn't mention the term emotional development, that's what it's about. And then subsequent to that, we have the theories of attachment by, and some of you would be familiar with Bowlby's and Ainsworth's works. And ultimately, the theories of emotional intelligence, which are more closer to our times now. And we now realize that emotional development is central to all areas. In fact, it's a cornerstone. And if we are not able to actually make that stable and secure, every other thing in the child's life gets affected, whether it's education, social development, their own sense of self, yeah, future growth, etc. In fact, children often fail to thrive or even survive if they are deprived of the emotional nurturance that they require. So, what influences emotional development? No doubt, things like their wiring or their blueprint that they come with. So there is something about how they are born, isn't it? Yeah? And then there are attachments and how secure those are. There are life experiences. There's love and nurturance, which is vital, and the consistency of it. Recognition of a child as the unique people they are. That's vital again. And the stability and security, predictability, and finally, stress, no doubt. So we have all these elements that go towards influencing what is called emotional development. Stress, how do you think stress might influence emotional development? Now, one of the, if you look at how our lives are and children's lives are, as they start growing up and as they step out of home and the comforts of home, they encounter a lot of things and situations which are stressful, mild to moderate usually, and thankfully for most children. And those are controllable stresses, which are like immunizations. And in fact, what we have found through research over the years is that these stressors actually help the child to become more robust and develop what is called, in psychological terms, resilience. And emotional resilience, which can't be really quantified or defined very clearly, but it's a kind of a quality that you develop with time, which helps you to weather the storms of life, really. Yeah. So the mild and the moderate stressors, no doubt, are something that are, sort of wanted, or it's something that helps you to grow. But when you talk about extreme stress, now that could lead to trauma. And what can cause trauma? It could be natural and man-made disasters, endemic war zones, extremes of living conditions, accidents, road traffic accidents, domestic violence, and of course, pardon me, child abuse, which is, I think this is becoming too complicated. I'm going to shut this and I'm going to look at the screen and then talk. Yeah. So it's child abuse of all kinds, including sexual abuse, no doubt about that. It could do physical things, and now we know that it can actually create or cause structural changes, hormonal changes, which could be permanent and definitely long-term. It could cause affective or emotional changes, including PTSD, but very, very concerningly, it actually causes decrease in empathy and a lack of control in children who have sexual abuse. And I'm mentioning all this is because, yeah, okay, is that better? Thanks. Yeah. And I'm mentioning all this, it's because we can probably draw sort of relationships as to how therapy is going to work in such instances. So in terms of relationship and socialization, again, attachment and emotional stability in attachment, that gets deeply affected. So there is disorganized, insecure attachment, violence and victimization in romantic relationships and all, what have you. So all those kind of things follow as a consequence. And in a personal level, of course, everybody knows they have shame and guilt, reduced self-esteem, but they also have what's called an external locus of control. They attribute whatever happens to them outside, not inside them. And you can imagine that once that happens, you hardly have control over your life. You're actually putting the onus or the responsibility on something else outside you. And that does not augur well for change from within. Yeah? So, and again, from a behavioral point of view, there can be very high risk-taking behaviors, including suicidal behaviors. And two of the most dreaded conditions that you get are borderline personality disorder and a high risk of becoming a child abuser themselves. So that's what we are dealing with. And it's a cyclical process, I think. One of the reasons we had some discussion in the morning as to what is going to appeal to policymakers, to funders, to the government, etc. I think if we begin to understand how cyclical this is, how transgenerational this is, and how it gets passed on from one generation to the other, then it begins to make sense. How it's damaging the very future that we talk about when we talk about shining India. It doesn't quite fit in together, does it? And that might make sense. So very quickly, factors that determine amount of harm. Out of various factors, what I wanted to focus on is the degree of helplessness. So if a child or a person is in a very helpless position of being exploited and abused repeatedly, that's the one that causes the maximum harm. And a lot of the times, even after abuse ends and the therapeutic process or the management begins, the helplessness doesn't go away. And we have to address that. And the second part, of course, is the resilience that we talk about. So here the dots are beginning to connect. And what are the factors that aid recovery and healing? High level of family functioning and support, counseling, therapy, getting rid of guilt, and a sense of justice. And here again, I want to emphasize, when I say sense of justice, it is not about getting a conviction, but it is the way the system, including family and the institution, deals with it. So, for instance, if in an institution, if there's an older, teenage boy who has abused a younger one, there is no question as to who needs to go away from that institute and who stays. A lot of the times, in our zeal and our enthusiasm, we might remove the child thinking that would protect him or her. But that doesn't, again, it's not interpreted positively by the child. It's almost as if you heap more burden on the child who's already burdened with guilt that I must have played a part in it. That's why they're removing me from here. So you have to have, the message has to be very clear, and that brings about a sense of justice in the person and a lot of the times in the family, right? So I'm going to skip disclosure and come back to it if anybody is interested during our discussion time. I'm going to go on to the therapeutic process. There's no question that there is going to be resistance. There's going to be all kinds of defenses that a child or an adolescent will have after you discover that there has been sexual abuse. And the cornerstone of how to gradually get into their lives is to build the therapeutic relationship. Now, how do you do that? How do you build a therapeutic relationship when you have that kind of a trauma, that kind of sort of emotional dissonance and pain staring at your face? Yeah, it's very hard to look away from that, isn't it? Yeah, and much against kind of logical sort of reasoning, you might have to go out of that and start talking about things that are outside the abuse. So what we call problem-free talk, getting to know the child, right? And talk about the family tree. So, absolutely very colorful family tree, get to know the relationships, people who the child is close to, who she plays with, who's the person who stood up for her when she was in trouble, and all of that. And it fleshes out their life story. And of course, the role of fun and play that you must bring into the therapeutic process, because that opens them up emotionally. Not only is it cathartic for children to play and express their feelings, even drawings, paintings, etc. are very healing, no doubt, but so is play. And to be able to drop your seriousness and your adult guards and be able to actually go down on your knees and do that with children, adolescents, have fun, crack jokes, is something which is absolutely vital in the therapeutic process. So again, it goes against, it seems, awkward as to how could you do that when there's so much of pain out there. But that is exactly what will get you, open up windows to be able to get in, right? Staying away from problem-saturated narrative. A lot of the times you'll find that, they come with only problems in their lives. And to be able to shift your focus from there and be able to see where the resources and strengths are is a big thing in the therapeutic framework. And we'll talk a little more about that in a bit. Yeah? And deep listening and mirroring. So oftentimes when you mirror their posture, you mirror their feelings, of course, that is a part of the therapeutic process, no doubt. I'm sure a lot of you do it all the time. Containment. Containing pain. And it will come back cyclically. Even while you're playing, even while you're having fun, even while you're discussing the family tree, suddenly you might come across an incident which is very painful. And you have to then get into it, hold it, listen to it deeply. And that containment without finding solutions. As adults, as therapies, we are often quick to jump, due to our own anxiety sometimes, to find solutions to something which is so painful in a child. Reassure them, don't worry about it, we'll take care. None of that is required. What the child asks of you at that time is actually listen and acknowledge and validate. That's what they're looking for. So that, and it is cyclical, because, you might feel that the child is really improving, wonderful days are, sort of replacing the terrible ones that you had in the past, but every now and then the pain is going to come back. Yeah, because there are so many bits in their lives where the pain has got embedded. The pain and the guilt is sometimes almost gone down to the level of the cell, you realize, in deep-seated abuse. So there is no doubt things like transference, which can be severe, and counter-transference. Sometimes contracts, particularly if there's extremes of behavior and suicidal behaviors, works wonderfully. So don't ever try and do contracts right at the outset, because they're going to just walk away, Till the time you have a good relationship and this person is going to listen to you, you can't really go to these kind of, some of these things that we're going to now discuss. So contracts are to do with behaviors which are high-risk behaviors, or, which are going to damage the child themselves, someone else, and to be able to have clear boundaries that you can't do that. even documenting that, have a little certificate and understanding, both of you sign, makes a great deal of difference to young people. And collaborative solutions, solutions that you listen to be able to understand the child's perspective and take together. Again, we will discuss very quickly a framework that we often use to be able to do that. And the other big thing that we often attempt to do, and this you can see, I'm sure by now, is a long process, yeah? So you begin with relationship development, now you've come to a stage when the child is probably opening up and sharing a lot more and beginning to look at solutions and listen to you, etc. And then you start rebuilding the narrative. And what I mean by that is to be able to look at, again, the success stories in their lives, to look at what worked and when and how. And while you do, or look at the strengths and the capabilities of the child, and what are the forums that you find where the child can actually channelize their energies to be able to build a narrative. Because a lot of the times, all of us, we run with a certain story of ourselves. It gives us a sense of identity, doesn't it? And if in the therapeutic process you take that away by saying, we need to discard this, we can't look at this anymore, let's put it in the past, what do you have? You have a lot of vacuum. It's highly anxiety-provoking, which is why children often keep going back to abusive relationship, because they know no better. That's a part of their life, that's a part of their identity. And that's what you need to replace by having other narratives in place. And you have to build that narrative through relationships, through activities, through a certain lifestyle. And that's what it means when I talk about rebuilding narratives. And the relationship and attachment figures, you remember how important that is, how their attachment is poor. So particularly in the case of Pramod, for instance, right? We actually identified staff members and other older children. No doubt there is an attachment with the therapist. That's one of them. Any child, even a child, understands that that's never going to last forever. But other relationships do. So how do you work with that? How do you help the child to develop other warm, nurturing, trustworthy relationships? It may take time, but you have to begin somewhere here. And that's what that is about, right? And of course, I can't overemphasize the importance of the therapist getting support and supervision, because it's such a draining and the burnout is so high in working with child abuse. It is a phenomena which actually, so again, very quickly going through the impact on the family. I'm not going to go into every detail, but families also go through a lot, just like children do. So they go through denial, disbelief, confusion, shock, and splitting. Just as you remember in Priya's case, the family split up. And a lot of the times, there's so much of angst, anger, blame towards each other that often families, even institutions, split up when disclosure or child sexual abuse comes to the fore. So splitting is something that often happens. And again, as the family starts experiencing shame, guilt, remorse, they begin to isolate themselves. They can't face up to the world. And that's one of the most damaging things that they're doing to themselves and to the child. Yeah? And that's something that we need to, again, address. So what we... Of course, it has, the reason why I've highlighted the non-judgmental approach is that when you have a child who has not been adequately protected and has suffered sexual abuse, as therapists, as other adults, the anger often goes to the parents, the family, as to why could they not do anything about it? Why could they not see it? And to take a non-judgmental position with the parents is a very difficult task. You have to really sort of, reach out within to your resources, I believe. So look for resources and strengths in the family system. Encourage to reach out to extended family, communicate to the community, and clear and concrete plans that are realistic and empowering. So let's see how this could work. Now, again, very quickly, there's some research on how individuals, communities, the society responds to child sexual abuse. And there is some work by this person called Woodcock in UK in 2002. He laid out what is called triple jeopardy. And what he found through his research is it's not just difficult for children to hold sexual abuse in their minds and express in words, but it's just as difficult for carers and parents. And it's very hard for workers, professionals to hold it within their experience as well. So what you get is what's called a gaze aversion. You don't want to look at it. All the denial that we see in our society, in our community, in the legal system, in the government, is probably due to this. Because when you know that 50% of your children are getting abused sexually or getting exposed to sexual material, or at least 22% are. What does it say about us as a society? How difficult must it be to kind of integrate in the kind of concept we have about ourselves? And that's why it's very, very difficult to look at. And that's the gaze aversion about. And it becomes very complex indeed. Again, the blaming and the, holding each other responsible. So what they have tried to do through a combination of, or elements of the postmodern therapies, such as solution-focused brief therapy or narrative therapy, is they have picked up elements for safety of children. And it is called the science of safety, from where the science of well-being model has been adopted. And what they have done, and this is also a model that will work even for barefoot workers who go out into the community. Not necessarily fully trained therapists, but even people who are sensitive, aware, who can deal with therapy, at least at the initial level. Those kind of people can work this out. So here you can see a kind of a form, which again was kind of, I started actually using this form about a good 10 to 12 years ago when I was working in the UK. It was very popular then. However, it does not have to be like that. It's not rigid. Yeah, it's a philosophy that you take. So, I mean, I don't ever get married to your the therapy that you learn. I mean, that's what I say. But you can definitely take from it. So what it talks about is that there is a format where the counselor or the therapist puts down his or her worries and also the strengths, yeah, in the system and the resources that you find. And he also does that in consultation with the child or the young person. And that is very important, because that is what gives them the sense of ownership and also empowers them, the sense of control that we were talking about. The helplessness that the child often feels probably gets neutralized to an extent by the child getting actively involved in the process of discussion and goal setting. So in the goals, the child has a stake, and so does the carer. The carers tend to feel overpowered by the expertise that workers bring. And sometimes it's vital to actually take their perspective, listen to them without judgment, and take their account as well. And similarly, again, the worker's goal. So we are working together as a team here. We are trying to see who can do what, and everybody has responsibility. Everybody feels empowered in the process. And you jot it down, and you keep reviewing it. And you're reviewing it through certain very simplistic procedures, and I'll come to that. So what are the 6 practice elements in this? You understand, no doubt, the impact and vulnerabilities, but you also look for exceptions, right? You look for clear goals, and you start scaling what is called well-being. How's the feeling inside, yeah? So when I talk about exceptions, it's about, again, what I referred to briefly earlier, is what are the parts of their lives which has given them a sense of success? When have they felt empowered, in control? What are the things in their lives, in their relationships, that have worked for them? So that's what you look at. So success in the past, windows to skills and abilities. What are you good at? And a lot of the times when a child is abused or is going through such a rough period, we don't focus on that anymore, because the whole energy goes into resolving the problem, looking at the pain, yeah? Step aside from the culture of hopelessness and look at what you can achieve from here onwards. Preserve well-functioning areas of life. Again, do what works. Keep doing that more and more. It affirms competence and raises the level of optimism and hope. So where, when, who, what, these are questions you ask often. How did that happen? How did you cope with that then? I mean, you were going through such a bad phase last year in January, but you did so well in that sporting event, you came first. How did you overcome this? My God, I can't even believe how you did that. So those kind of affirmations and break it down to little bits will help the child also say, yeah, I think I could. I think I can, despite the fact that I've had such bad experiences in life, I can pull it all together again. And that's the thing that happens. So in goal setting again, it's co-constructed, like I said, it's clear, simple, attainable goals. And we focus again on the presence rather than absence. What's there? What's there to tap into? What's the resource which we still have preserved? Yeah? Now this again releases positive energy, and this again is reviewed very, very regularly, maybe once in a month. And scaling is another process. I don't know how many of you are familiar with solution-focused brief therapy, but it's a simple process where let's say we are talking about well-being, the feeling that you have inside. How's life treating you? How are you feeling in the last 1 week? Yeah? Let's scale it on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is absolutely wonderful. You're doing fabulously well. Nothing is bothering you. And 0 is the pits. Nothing can get worse than that. Where do you think you are over there, right? And many kids particularly are very easily, much easily than talk about, break down symptoms and suffering, etc., are able to put their finger on and say, maybe I'm on a 4. Yeah, maybe I was 3 last week, or I was at 4. I've slid to 3. I wonder why. Yeah, and that's what you do. And then you also ask them, so where do you want to be, and how much time do you think it'll take? So you're at 3 now. You want to be at 6? Do you think it's going to take 2 months or 3 months? And without suggesting it, and they might say, yeah. And what do you need to do to get there, right? So again, it becomes much clearer. So from a very complicated kind of of course, the process is dynamic. Of course, there is change and ongoing therapy that is going on. But if we are able to break it down to simpler things that children can understand, then this can do wonders. And coping questions, acknowledge and highlight the strengths and the resources of the child. How did you manage to do that? I think we've already been to that. And again, redefining and deconstructing and empowering the person with new stories. We have referred to that already. So the key elements of this model really is that it's holistic in approach, it's collaborative, respectful, useful when the complexity of the problem is overwhelming, simplifying it, yeah? It maps out resilience, so it's empowering. It helps to give new beginnings and narratives. It balances the strengths and vulnerabilities, and it, we believe, facilitates healing. Again, this is a process, it is a therapeutic approach that we follow, and I believe that we have had a few success stories, and we've been able to keep ourselves going as well, because if you are completely enmeshed in the pain and the dark side of it, then it's very difficult to pull any person out of it. Maybe even, you tend to get enmeshed and dragged in. So we, again, the whole broad philosophy is to keep a fine balance, keeping one foot in acknowledgement and one in possibilities. So no doubt be open and acknowledging of feelings, of difficulties, etc., but all the time look for possibilities, look for exceptions, look for which way to go. So perhaps if that person had come, and in fact he was summoned, so to say, by the rest of the family, including grandparents and everybody, and he came and he was confronted by the other adults in the family and said, this is what happened. And he acknowledged it. And he did not deny it, by the way. But he never once apologized and said or showed any remorse. So that was the other tipping point, which told them that if that's your attitude, then please go. So again, it's a dynamic process. But if we are able to keep some of the key elements in mind and keep everybody's interest, of course, the child's interest is central, absolutely, no doubt. But if we also are able to listen to the other people involved, then that helps. At the end of the day, this girl, Priya, is, as I said, is doing very well, no doubt, with the angst. Perhaps it would have been a fairy tale finish if we had the family together, as just as supportive and just as together as they used to be. But perhaps sometimes in child sexual abuse, this is how it splits, and these are the consequences one needs to face. I do believe that given the kind of approach or kind of callousness we show towards child sexual abuse, sometimes it's important to take a stand like that for the child, to send a very clear message to family, to community, that if a child is actually making a disclosure, even if it is after many years, we have to believe her, yeah? And I think that gets communicated there.
Very good answer, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I run several children's homes in Cochin, Kerala. One boys' home and a home for pregnant teenagers and teenage mothers and babies. I've been faced with child sexual abuse several times within one time within the boys' home itself, from elder boys to younger boys, and some of the children who come to us have already been sexually abused within their families, etc. One of my questions is, if we come across a child who has been sexually abused and we would like to get them into therapy, how frequent should that therapy be? Because unfortunately in Cochin there are not many psychiatrists or counsellors who are very well, who are knowledgeable about child sexual abuse. I've had people say, oh, you can come to me once a week for an hour. Is that really enough? And should we be dealing with psychiatrists or counsellors? I had the orphanage board who visited a couple of days ago and said they need counselling, and I said we have a psychiatrist who comes in half a day a week. Oh no, shouldn't be a psychiatrist, should be a counsellor. So I don't really know what what should be done.
Yeah. I think we were just discussing, the necessity and need for training and capacity building. Who are the people who are really equipped to do this work? Psychiatrists, in their basic training that they get in our country, often do not get trained in psychotherapy, leave alone child sexual abuse. In psychotherapy, CSA is probably one of the toughest things to deal with. I mean, it's as a child psychiatrist, you often do have to go through training. So I had to go through training to be able to, and I wanted to, in fact. And so I do continue to do therapy, but all psychiatrists don't. So that's something that you would probably have to ask your psychiatrist. Counselors, again, are of different kinds, and there are some who may be equipped to deal with it. Counselors usually, if you look at counseling versus therapy is something which goes, in a very layman's way, deeper into the psyche and is able to then go through the processes which are sometimes not as clear as you have in counseling. So in counseling, you might look at a problem and you have certain solutions you actually agree upon, and then you send the person back to come every once in a week or once in a fortnight to tell you how things are going. Whereas in therapy, you actually go through other emotional processes with the person and build a therapeutic relationship, so to say. So typically speaking, in child sexual abuse, you need a therapist who has had either some training or experience in it. Having said that, there could be people who could be trained, right? There could be people who have the empathy and who understand child sexual abuse at an emotional level. Yeah, at a conceptual level. They can connect to children who go through pain, and they can be trained, not for very long. And if they are supervised, they can be like barefoot counselors and used, simpler templates like the one that I shared with you, and that can work. But even for that, you have to build that system. You have to have a group of people who are training, or at least one or two who are training a group of others who can then, and supervising at the same time, who can take children on. So yeah, it's a long haul. I mean, we are beginning the journey here, and I think that we should be able to then look at who could be the trainers and who could be the barefoot counselors, so to say, who will then go out into the community. Could they be school teachers? Could they be, staff in certain institutions or NGOs who can volunteer and have a background maybe on such issues?
So when can you come and give us a workshop?
I'm sure there are many others in the southern part of the country who do this work. And so in the beginning, what we find is that they might require very close monitoring because the emotional turmoil is so high that the therapy sessions could be twice or up to thrice. More than thrice, it doesn't really work. Besides, in a week, yeah. And what we often also then try and get together is a support system. So although the therapy is ongoing, you sensitize if there is a parent, if there is a staff member in an institute, you sensitize all those people to keep an eye and to also have informal sessions of just sitting and chatting and sharing and playing and all of that. Yeah. So if you like to call it the rehabilitation process or the process of finding their other positive self starts on the side. So the therapeutic process is not restrained to that 1 hour a child gets, but it's an ongoing thing. So so again, when we work in Salam Balak Trust, which is probably why, and we have the infrastructure over there, we can't have so much of leeway sometimes with families, as you saw in Zakira's case, but we do have a lot more in an institution. So we work with the rest of the staff. So we designate staff that in the night this person will be there, keeping an eye, spending time. In the day this person. So almost 24/7 there is somebody who's keeping an eye on a child who's going through a crisis. Once the crisis starts abating, once the self-harm, the suicidal behaviors, etc., they start coming down, then it can take another direction. Then you can look at channelizing energies more constructively, positively, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the therapeutic process itself can vary from thrice in a week to even once a week. Sometimes once a week also works, as long as the rest of the process of management, holding the child, supporting the child in the community continues.
Can I?
Sure.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Sen.
Yeah.
Absolutely deepening. Sunil Arora from Balasha Trust, Mumbai. Thank you very much for this session because it was very, very deep. I have two questions, and second question arises after what you just said right now. My first question is, I'm taking my previous friend's question in a different way.
Okay.
A family, 2 children, and there's a decent amount of age gap between the 2 children. Okay, so both of them are not major. So when such a situation happens in terms of CSA by the older child to the younger child, so there the situation of, the family separating or, not allowing this member to come in does not arise. I am trying to see, apart from, counseling and healing sessions, and specifically healing and justice, would you recommend that if the parents talk to the elder child in front of the younger child, okay, about what has happened and try to give a sense of justice because they are not interested in going out of the way and taking legal justice, do you think that helps in both healing as well as justice, which is attached with healing? That's my first question. And my second question is, which, as I said, is arised of what you just ended the previous question with, is support system within, the organization, like in the night, in the day. Mm-hmm. So my question is actually, is whether these people who will provide this external support system, mm-hmm. should they be aware of why is this being done? The extra support system which we are trying to provide to this child. Because if you're understanding where I'm coming from, that if you're asking them to be vigilant in the night or, be a more friendly. Yeah. So do we need to make these external support systems aware of what has happened, unfortunately, with this child?
So I'll answer the second question first. Please. Yes, they do, but they need not know the details of what's going on in therapy. So they may be in the process of disclosure and discovery. There's so much of details, etc., which is very private and personal, and which is only between the child and the therapist. Yeah, but outside that, there is a broad overview of things which some other key people need to know in a family, in an organization. So the fact that they might have gone through some kind of very exploitative, abusive situation could be revealed. It could be revealed that this person is very vulnerable at the moment and they have these kind of thoughts and they are likely to behave in these kind of ways. Those are kind of, that kind of information certainly one can share, I think. Yeah. And again, it depends on who you're choosing to, because even within the staff, you might find that some are more trustworthy than others. So we often carefully pick the staff. Because it can boomerang back. If that staff goes and kind of starts telling tales and, it can really go sour, yeah? So we have to be very careful as to how you choose that. The first question of yours is very tricky. Again, to an extent, it will depend on the maturity of both the children, where they are at in terms of their chronological age and also emotional age. And it may be worthwhile to have a very clear session together where who is responsible for this is clearly established, perhaps by 2 parents, and if there is another person like a therapist even, yeah, to set very clearly, this is absolutely not acceptable, right? Having done that, yeah, sorry, go on, you were going to ask.
In front of both the children, you mean?
Yes, in front of both the children, to start with. But having done that, see, again, the West has come... made a full circle. In the beginning, if something like this were to happen, the older child would immediately be whisked off to social services and go into foster care, right? They're not doing that anymore. They're thinking twice because that kind of a disruption can cause all sorts of things within the family. The parents might also be full of guilt and might even be very upset about the way it was handled, etc. So an outside agency comes and takes decisions. So the decisions have to be collaborative, I believe. And if in the collaborative decisions, if the parents and even the older boy understands that this was wrong, and maybe I need to take a short vacation or a holiday and I need to go and stay with my uncle and aunt for a week as a kind of a token thing that, yes, it was wrong and you need to have this consequence to be able to integrate this. It's not a punishment. So he's also a child, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. It's not something that you're doing to kind of sort of cut his ego and the person to size, but it is something that he needs to integrate, and it's a very serious thing. If you can, envisage him growing up to become an adult who might also have such tendencies. So yeah, that's probably the way I will go. But having said that, I think each case, each family has to be dealt with in its own merit, and if we are able to keep the framework in mind, then we get the answers as we go along. It's not always easy. There are a lot of times when it's, as therapists, as managers, you are completely torn and confused as to what steps to take.
Thank you.
Thank you.